Welcome back, dear listeners and friends of the channel. Before we begin today's story, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We love seeing our community gathered from every corner of the world. Now let us step into a scene of breathtaking beauty and hidden despair. The chandeliers above the ballroom gleamed with 1,000 lights, their crystals scattering brilliance over the polished marble floor. White roses cascaded down the grand staircase in carefully arranged bouquets. Silver ribbons tied each chair with perfection. Musicians played a soft classical melody that drifted like perfume through the air. Guests in gowns of satin and suits tailored to perfection moved in clusters, whispering behind crystal glasses filled with champagne. From the outside, this was the perfect wedding, the sort of event society pages would rave about for weeks. Yet inside one young woman's heart, there was nothing but turmoil. At the center of it all stood Isabella Carter, the bride. Her gown shimmered like frost in moonlight, fitted delicately to her slender frame, a veil trailing behind her like a cloud of captured mist. Her cheeks held the faintest color, as if brushed on by duty rather than joy. Though her lips curved politely whenever a guest looked her way, her eyes betrayed the truth. They glistened not with excitement, but with the heavy weight of resignation. Around her, the whispers continued. "Such a fortunate girl," one woman murmured, "to marry into security at last." Another replied, "Fortunate perhaps, but notice how pale she looks." The guests saw only what they wanted, yet Isabella heard every word like an echo in her chest. She was the daughter of a once powerful family, now bound by debt and expectation. Today she was not marrying for love. She was marrying because her family's survival demanded it. As the music swelled, Isabella clasped her bouquet tighter, her knuckles white beneath the lace gloves. The scent of roses filled her lungs but offered no comfort. She looked toward the gilded doors of the hall, half wishing someone might burst in to stop the ceremony. It was a childish hope, she told herself. No rescue would come. And yet, dear listener, consider this. If you were in Isabella's place, dressed in splendor, yet chained by duty, what would you do? Would you walk down the aisle obediently, or would you dare to hope for a miracle? Isabella Carter had not always lived beneath the shadow of duty and sacrifice. Once her family name was spoken with admiration, her father known for visionary deals, and her mother admired for elegance and generosity. Their home had been a mansion filled with laughter, the gardens always alive with gatherings of friends and relatives, and Isabella had grown up believing her life would be guided by choice, not by chains. Yet fortune is a fickle companion. When her father's business ventures collapsed under a storm of poor investments and ruthless competitors, the Carter empire fell into ruin. Creditors circled like hawks, and debts piled higher than the marble columns at the family estate. Overnight, Isabella found herself no longer a cherished daughter, but an asset to be bartered. Her parents, once pillars of society, now whispered in late-night arguments about bankruptcy, foreclosure, and shame. At first, Isabella tried to shield her younger siblings from the tension. She smiled for them, told them bedtime stories, and insisted everything would be fine. But even they noticed the servants departing one by one, the carriages being sold, the endless stream of stern letters arriving each morning. The inevitable day arrived when her father sat her down, his face pale and worn, and explained that salvation had come in the form of Victor Hale. Victor was a businessman whose fortune had been built on steel and stone, a man who looked at people the way others looked at numbers on a ledger. He was older, broad-shouldered, with eyes like polished granite. His reputation was that of someone efficient and cold, a man who crushed competitors without blinking. Yet he had made an offer he would settle the Carter debts and secure their future if Isabella became his wife. It was not spoken as a request. It was presented as the only solution. Isabella felt her world tilt. Marriage had always been something she imagined arriving with music, affection, and the trembling thrill of first love. Instead, it was being handed to her like a contract, to be signed her heart and afterthought. She tried to protest, but her mother's hands trembled as she clasped her daughter's fingers, begging softly. "Please, Isabella, think of your brothers. Think of what will happen to all of us if you refuse." Guilt gnawed at her resolve until silence became her answer. Now, as she stood in the wedding hall, she remembered that conversation vividly. each word another chain locked around her spirit. The grandeur surrounding her felt hollow. The chandeliers sparkled, but she saw only the reflection of her own entrapment. Guests whispered approvingly about Victor's wealth, his influence, his generosity in paying off the Carter debts. They did not speak of the price extracted from Isabella's freedom. She caught sight of Victor near the altar speaking with dignitaries, as if this union were a business merger. His smile was thin, his posture commanding. When his gaze slid to her, she felt her stomach tighten. He did not look at her as a man looks at a woman he loves. He looked at her as if she were already purchased. Around her, the guests admired her gown, her beauty, the elegance of the ceremony. None of them noticed the way her bouquet shook in her hands. None cared about the tear she quickly brushed from the corner of her eye. They saw a dutiful daughter fulfilling her role. Inside, Isabella raged quietly against the injustice. She had dreams once of studying art history, of traveling to Florence and Paris, of sketching cathedrals at dawn. Those dreams had been folded away and locked in a chest, sacrificed to the altar of family obligation. She told herself she was strong enough to endure, that her sacrifice would protect the people she loved. Yet a small voice whispered that she was surrendering her soul. As the music played and the priest prepared to begin the ceremony, Isabella stood frozen in the spotlight of opulence, her heart pounding against invisible walls. Around her, applause swelled for a union that promised prosperity for one man and survival for another family. But for her, it promised only chains. In that moment, she closed her eyes briefly and prayed for something impossible. Perhaps a sudden storm, perhaps the earth shaking, perhaps a stranger arriving to declare this fate unjust. She opened her eyes again and forced her lips into a smile. Guests nodded approvingly. Her parents looked relieved. Victor looked victorious, and Isabella felt herself sink deeper into despair, unaware that destiny was about to answer her silent prayer in the most dramatic way possible. The ceremony began with solemn music rising from the string quartet at the side of the hall. The priest cleared his throat and raised his hands for silence. Guests turned expectantly toward the bride and groom, their expressions bright with anticipation of a spectacle that would be written about in every society column. Isabella felt her breath falter beneath the veil. Each step toward the altar felt like an iron weight tied to her ankles. Victor Hale stood waiting, his face set in a mask of satisfaction. To him, this was not a union of hearts, but the sealing of a transaction. He extended his hand palm open, demanding rather than offering. Isabella's fingers trembled as she reached forward, her heart screaming for escape. Just as her fingertips brushed his palm, the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the hall burst open with a thunder that silenced the entire gathering. All eyes turned as the doors swung wide, spilling in a flood of light from the afternoon sun. Framed in that glow stood a tall figure, shoulders broad beneath a perfectly tailored suit of midnight black hair, swept back with precision eyes, like steel glinting in the shadows. The hush in the hall deepened until only the echo of the intruder's footsteps filled the marble floor. He walked with the calm command of a man accustomed to boardrooms and battlefields, every stride deliberate, every movement drawing attention. The guests whispered in shock. Some recognized him immediately. Alexander Blackwell, the youngest billionaire in the city, the elusive CEO whose empire stretched from banks to shipping lines, a man known for ruthless brilliance and an aura of untouchable power. What was he doing here? He stopped halfway down the aisle, and his voice rang out deep and unwavering, each word slicing through the stunned silence. "I object." The declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. The priest blinked in confusion, dropping his script. Guests gasped, fanning themselves, with program's murmurs rising like a tide. Victor's face darkened, his jaw, tightening fury flashing in his eyes. Isabella's heart slammed against her ribs, disbelief flooding her. She had never spoken more than 2 words to Alexander Blackwell, and now here he stood interrupting her wedding with 3 that shattered everything. "I object." He strode forward, ignoring the shocked faces, ignoring the whispers that followed his every step. He reached the front where Isabella stood frozen, her veil trembling with her breath. Without hesitation, he extended his hand strong and certain, and his eyes locked on hers. "She's with me." Gasps rippled through the hall. A lady in the front row clutched her pearls. Another guest whispered that this was scandal beyond imagination. Victor barked angrily. "What is the meaning of this, Blackwell? You dare disgrace me in front of my own guests." Alexander's gaze did not waver. Calmly he replied, "I will not allow this charade to continue. Isabella does not belong in a bargain struck to rescue debts. She deserves freedom, not chains disguised as vows." His words struck Isabella like a wave. For a moment she forgot the crowd, the whispers, even Victor's seething rage. She saw only the man before her eyes, cold, yet protective, a stranger who had dared to speak the words she had prayed for silently. Victor stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can waltz in here and claim what is mine?" Alexander turned his head slowly, his expression carved in stone. "She is not yours. She never was." Then he turned back to Isabella and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You have a choice now. Take my hand if you want to walk away." Isabella stared at his outstretched hand. Her breath caught her entire body trembling. The hall seemed to spin with gasps and accusations, but in that single moment she heard only her own heartbeat and his steady voice. Victor snarled, ordering the priest to continue shouting that this was outrageous. But Isabella's fingers moved of their own accord, rising, reaching until they touched Alexander's palm. His hand closed around hers with firm certainty, grounding her as if he had pulled her from drowning waters. Murmurs turned to cries of shock reporters among the guests, scribbling furiously, cameras flashing as scandal unfolded. Alexander drew Isabella gently to his side, his arm a shield between her and Victor. "She belongs with me," he said once more, his voice calm but final. Victor roared, his pride wounded before society, yet he could do nothing. The priest stammered, the orchestra faltered, and the guests leaned forward, hungry for more. Isabella's father staggered to his feet, pale and trembling, but Alexander met his gaze and spoke clearly. "I will not let her sacrifice herself for debts that should never have been her burden. Leave the rest to me." With that, he guided Isabella away from the altar, each step echoing like defiance against centuries of arranged unions and loveless contracts. The aisle that once felt like a tunnel to her doom now stretched before her like a path to freedom. She clung to Alexander's arm, heart still racing, mind reeling from the impossibility of what had just happened. Behind them, Victor shouted, his voice echoing with rage, but the guests were already abuzz with excitement, scandal, and awe. Isabella lifted her eyes to the man beside her. She whispered shakily, "Why are you doing this?" Alexander's gaze softened just enough for her to glimpse something human beneath the steel. "Because you should never be forced into a life you did not choose. And because though you do not remember your mother once saved mine, consider this the beginning of repaying a debt." Isabella's lips parted in astonishment. Her mother's kindness had returned in the most unexpected form. Her heart swelled with gratitude and fear all at once. What she did not yet realize was that this dramatic interruption was only the first act of a story that would entangle her with Alexander Blackwell far more deeply than either of them could predict. The chaos of the interrupted ceremony still echoed in Isabella's mind as Alexander guided her through a side corridor of the grand hall. Servants glanced up in alarm, but quickly looked away, unwilling to question the billionaire whose presence carried the weight of power. Once they reached a quieter room draped with heavy curtains and lined with gilded mirrors, Alexander released her hand and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, his gray eyes sharp like polished steel. Isabella clutched her bouquet tightly, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "You ruined everything. Do you realize what you have done?" He studied her for a long moment before answering, his tone calm, almost detached. "I know exactly what I have done. I have stopped a marriage that was nothing but a contract." Isabella's heart pounded. "You do not even know me. Why would you interfere?" He took a step closer, the faint scent of sandalwood surrounding him steady and grounding. "I do know you, Isabella Carter. Perhaps not personally, but I know of your family. More importantly, I know of your mother. Years ago, when my mother was gravely ill, your mother arranged for a specialist to see her when every other hospital refused. That act saved her life. I was too young to understand then, but I swore that someday, if the Carter family ever needed help, I would repay the debt. He paused, his voice dropping lower. Today is that day. Isabella stared stunned. The memory flickered faintly in her mind, her mother speaking of helping a woman in need. She never expected such an act of kindness to return in this form, but gratitude was tangled with fear. You cannot simply announce that I am with you. The world will tear us apart with questions. My family's debts will still remain. Victor will not give up. Alexander nodded as if he had anticipated her protests. That is why we need an arrangement. I want you to agree to pretend to be my fiancé. Publicly, you will stand by my side. The world will believe that you chose me and not Victor. In return, I will see that your family's debts are resolved discreetly. Isabella's breath caught. Pretend. The word echoed like both salvation and trap. Why would you need such a pretense? A man like you could have any woman he wanted. His jaw tightened slightly, a shadow passing across his eyes. Because despite what people think, I do not want just any woman. The world has already begun to whisper that I am incapable of commitment, that my empire is vulnerable without a family image to soften it. Shareholders, press rivals, circle journalists speculate. A fiancé silences them all. You would not be my pawn. You would be my shield, just as I will be yours. Isabella felt her pulse race. The offer dangled between them, heavy with implications. She remembered Victor's gaze at the altar, the feeling of being claimed rather than cherished. Compared to that, Alexander's proposal carried at least the illusion of choice, yet the thought of pretending terrified her. She whispered, "And what if I cannot play the part?" His lips curved faintly, almost the ghost of a smile. "From what I saw today, you already did. You walked with me before everyone in that hall, and not once did you falter. You are stronger than you think." Silence stretched between them, filled with the distant echo of the wedding party unraveling outside. Isabella's mind swirled with images of her parents' anxious faces, of Victor's wrath, of the gilded cage she had just escaped. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "And if I agree, what guarantees do I have?" Alexander's eyes locked with hers, unwavering. "My word, and my word has built empires. You will have freedom from Victor's security for your family, and the right to walk away if ever you wish." She laughed softly, bitterly. "That is easy for you to say. Billionaires are not known for letting go." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it brushed against her ear. "Try me." Isabella's heart trembled. In that moment she realized that he was not offering a dream, but a dangerous game, one that could consume her entirely. Yet between the path of chains and the path of pretense, she knew which she would choose. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze. "Very well, Mr. Blackwell. I will play the role. But understand this, I am not a doll for your shareholders. I will walk away the moment I feel the cage closing again." His eyes glimmered, and for the first time a flicker of warmth broke through the icy exterior. "Deal." He extended his hand once more. Isabella hesitated only a breath before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, binding her not with paper or ink, but with the unspoken promise of two lives suddenly entangled. Outside the city roared with gossip, but inside that quiet room, Isabella Carter had just stepped into a bargain that would change everything. She told herself it was only pretend, that her heart would remain untouched. But as Alexander released her hand with deliberate care, she already knew she had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. The first test of their arrangement came sooner than Isabella expected. Only 2 days after the dramatic interruption of her wedding, Alexander arrived at the Carter estate in a sleek black car that drew curious eyes from every neighbor. Isabella descended the staircase nervously, a simple dress, chosen carefully to avoid drawing too much attention. Alexander stood waiting in the grand hall, impeccable as ever, his suit tailored to perfection, his presence commanding even in silence. He offered his arm as if the gesture were natural, and though her heart fluttered, she accepted telling herself this was only part of the performance. Their destination was a charity gala hosted at one of the city's most prestigious hotels, a place where every glance carried weight and every whisper could shift reputations. As the car pulled up to the red carpet, Isabella's hands tightened around her small clutch. Flashbulbs exploded, reporters surged forward, and Alexander's hand settled firmly over hers, steadying her. "Remember," he murmured, "they see what we allow them to see." She forced a smile as the cameras captured them, stepping out together, the billionaire and his unexpected fiancé. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some recognized her as the bride nearly wed to Victor Hale. Others speculated on the sudden turn of events. Alexander guided her through the throng, his posture protective, his hand never straying far from hers. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers shimmered, and the air buzzed with speculation. At once, a reporter approached, microphone raised, asking if their engagement was true. Alexander answered smoothly, his voice calm yet decisive. "Yes, Isabella is the woman I have chosen." His words echoed through the hall, sealing the illusion with effortless authority. Isabella felt heat rush to her cheeks, but kept her smile fixed, nodding politely. Throughout the evening, guests circled them like moths to flame, eager to uncover details. Some asked intrusive questions. Others offered sly compliments. Each time Isabella faltered, Alexander intervened with quiet jokes or redirection, drawing laughter or admiration, allowing her a moment to breathe. When a glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the marble, the crowd turned in surprise. Without missing a beat, Alexander lifted his own glass and tapped it gently, raising a toast to the future. Laughter and applause followed. The tension dissolved, and Isabella looked at him in astonishment. He had transformed her mistake into a moment of charm. Later, as they moved toward the buffet, Isabella whispered, "You are too skilled at this." Alexander glanced at her lips curving faintly. "Who said I was acting?" Her heart skipped, but she quickly looked away. The gala stretched late into the night, and by the time they returned to the car, Isabella's feet ached from unfamiliar heels, yet her mind buzzed with the strange electricity that lingered whenever Alexander was near. Over the following weeks, their public appearances multiplied. A museum fundraiser, an art exhibition, a high-profile dinner with foreign investors. At each event, Alexander appeared at her side, introducing her as his fiancée, his voice steady, his gaze protective. Isabella learned to hold herself with poise, to answer questions with wit, to play the part of the billionaire's beloved. Yet in quiet moments, she caught herself laughing genuinely at his rare jokes, or blushing when his hand lingered a second too long on hers. One evening at the art museum, she stumbled on the edge of the carpet. Instantly, his hand caught her waist, his grip strong, his eyes flicking with concern. "Careful," he murmured. "I would hate for my fiancé to fall before the cameras." She glared half playfully, half flustered. "Instead of mocking me, you could simply say I look beautiful." He tilted his head, his gaze steady. "You do. More beautiful than any painting in this hall." Her breath caught the words, both unexpected and disarming. She turned quickly toward a canvas, pretending to study the colors, but her heart pounded with a rhythm she could not ignore. At another event, Isabella dropped a silver spoon into her wineglass, the clatter drawing stares. Before she could wilt under the scrutiny, Alexander raised his glass, clinked it deliberately, and announced a toast. The crowd followed his lead, laughter spreading. Once again, he had saved her from humiliation. Isabella whispered later, "You cannot keep rescuing me like this." He replied calmly, "A real partner protects, even a pretend one." Her chest tightened at the weight behind his words. These public outings became a dance of careful performance and unexpected sincerity. To the world, they were the perfect couple, but to Isabella, each smile, each glance carried the risk of becoming something dangerously real. Reporters wrote endlessly about the mystery of their romance society. Gossip speculated on how quickly the engagement had formed. Some praised Isabella's elegance, others whispered that she was lucky to have caught the untouchable Blackwell. Through it all, Alexander remained composed, answering speculation with silence, or with a cool smile that revealed nothing. Yet to Isabella, his smallest gestures spoke volumes, the way he adjusted the strap of her gown discreetly when it slipped, the way he leaned down to whisper reassurance when cameras pressed too close, the way his eyes softened when she laughed. After one particularly demanding evening, Isabella collapsed into the car seat, exhaling heavily. She muttered, "I feel like I am living someone else's life." Alexander looked out the window, his profile calm. "Perhaps you are living the life you deserve." She turned to him startled. "Do you truly believe that?" His gaze met hers unwavering. "I believe you are stronger than the role you have been forced to play. With me you can be more." She had no answer. Silence filled the car, but her heart churned with a warmth she could not suppress. Day by day, the line between pretending and reality blurred. Isabella reminded herself this was an arrangement born of necessity. Yet when Alexander introduced her to a circle of investors and looked at her with quiet pride, she felt something dangerously close to belonging. One night, after an exhausting gala, they stopped at a cafe rather than another polished restaurant. The simple wooden tables and scent of roasted beans made Isabella relax for the first time. "She teased you in a cafe, Mr. Blackwell. The newspapers will faint." He sipped his coffee calmly, then let them. She laughed, surprised at how ordinary he could be when the mask slipped. In that laughter she caught a glimpse of something rare, the man behind the billionaire, the human beneath the steel exterior. It was in these public appearances, under the gaze of countless eyes, that Isabella began to realize her heart was no longer safe. The pretense had become too convincing, and each whispered word, each steady hand, each fleeting smile, drew her deeper into a story she had never intended to live. As the weeks passed, Isabella found herself caught between two versions of reality, the one she presented to the glittering world alongside Alexander, and the one that gnawed at her when she was alone in her room at night. In public, she smiled her hand, tucked gracefully into his arm, her laughter timed to match his rare flashes of humor. She wore gowns she never dreamed of affording diamonds that once only appeared in magazines, and she moved through corridors of power as if she had always belonged. Yet behind every practiced smile, her heart battled with questions she could not silence. Was this still a performance, or had it become something more? She told herself repeatedly that it was all pretend, that Alexander needed her to protect his image, just as she needed him to shield her from Victor and the crushing debts. But then there were moments when his gaze lingered too long, when his hand brushed hers, not out of necessity, but out of instinct, when his voice softened as he whispered encouragement that no one else could hear. Those moments unsettled her because they felt real, and real was dangerous. The whispers of society grew sharper too. One morning, a newspaper headline caught her eye while she sipped tea. Blackwell's sudden fiancé, genuine love, or calculated move. She crumpled the page quickly, but the words seared into her mind. Was she nothing more than a convenient strategy? At a dinner party, one woman leaned in with a smile that was all teeth and malice. "My dear Isabella, do you truly believe Alexander's heart is yours? He has been rumored to have affairs in Paris and Milan and New York. Men like him do not change." Isabella forced a laugh and replied sweetly, "Perhaps rumors should remain in gossip columns." But later in the car she stared out the window, the question clawing at her heart. Did he see her as anything more than a role? The confusion deepened when she overheard a conversation not meant for her ears. At a gala, she slipped away to catch her breath and paused behind a marble column where two businessmen whispered about shady dealings. They mentioned Victor Hale and funds tied to overseas accounts. More chillingly, they hinted that the Blackwell empire might be entangled as well. Isabella's blood ran cold. If Alexander was connected to Victor's schemes, then everything she believed about him was a lie. She returned to the table, forcing a smile, but her mind whirled. When Alexander leaned close to murmur a quiet joke, she laughed automatically, while inside her chest a storm raged. That night, she sat at her desk, staring at the city lights, her hands trembling over her journal. She wanted to write the truth, to pour out her confusion, but no words came. All she could hear was the echo of her own heart asking, "Is he my savior, or another captor wearing a different mask?" Her mother's voice haunted her too, urging her to trust kindness, reminding her of debts repaid. But her father's weary eyes reminded her of survival, of the cold reality that power often hides corruption. Isabella pressed her palms against her temples, torn between loyalty and suspicion. The next morning at breakfast, Alexander noticed her silence. He asked if she was unwell. She forced a smile and said she was only tired, though her chest ached with the lie. His gaze lingered on her, probing, as if he sensed the walls she was building, but he did not press. Instead, he told her they were expected at another event that evening, his tone steady, his expression unreadable. As she dressed for the occasion, Isabella stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked elegant, poised, a perfect fiancée for a billionaire. But beneath the diamonds, her heart whispered that she was an actress in a play whose ending she did not know. Each day, she walked further into Alexander's world, deeper into the illusion they had crafted together. Yet every night, she wrestled with the same tormenting question. Was she falling in love with a man who truly cared, or was she surrendering to a brilliant deception that would shatter her when the truth emerged? The breaking point arrived on a night that began like any other. Isabella had prepared herself carefully, her gown a soft shade of ivory, her hair swept into an elegant twist. Alexander had invited her to a private dinner with several board members of his corporation. She knew the role she had to play, the attentive fiancée who balanced warmth with restraint, and for most of the evening she performed flawlessly. She laughed when required, offered small observations, when prompted, and watched with admiration as Alexander commanded the table with effortless authority. But beneath the surface, Isabella's unease had grown like a shadow she could not shake. Whispers she had overheard, documents she had glimpsed in discarded briefcases, rumors printed in bold headlines, all converged into one gnawing suspicion. She told herself she would wait for proof, that she would not judge until she knew for certain, but fate seldom grants the luxury of perfect timing. Near the end of the dinner, one of the board members, flushed from too much wine, leaned closer to Alexander and muttered something about offshore accounts and Victor Hale's efficiency. Isabella stiffened the words, cutting into her like ice. She tried to remain calm, sipping her water, but her hand trembled so violently that the glass nearly slipped. Alexander noticed his gray eyes flicking toward her, but he said nothing. The evening ended and they returned to his car. The city lights streaked past the window as silence stretched between them. At last, Isabella spoke, her voice low but fierce. "Tell me the truth. Are you involved with Victor?" Alexander did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. She pressed again, her voice breaking. "I need to know. Did you pull me from that altar, only to tie me to another chain?" Still he remained silent, and his silence felt heavier than any denial. Isabella's chest constricted, tears burning her eyes. "Do you understand what this means? I left everything behind. I trusted you, and now I hear your name tied to his schemes. If you care for me even a little, tell me it is not true." Alexander's hands clenched on the steering wheel. At last he spoke, his voice clipped. "Some battles are not as simple as guilty or innocent." That was all. No reassurance, no denial, only a wall of words that meant nothing. To Isabella, it was as good as confession. She turned away, pressing her fist to her lips to stifle a sob. The car pulled up to her family estate, and Alexander stopped but did not reach for her. She opened the door with shaking hands and stepped out, her gown brushing against the gravel. He called her name once quietly, but she did not look back. She walked inside with tears streaming down her face. That night she collapsed on her bed, clutching the pillow as sobs racked her body. She felt betrayed, foolish, broken. How could she have let herself believe that the man who stormed into her wedding with such defiance had been her rescuer? Perhaps he was only another player in the cruel game of power, using her as a pawn in a rivalry far beyond her comprehension. The next days were agony. Gossip columns speculated endlessly about their relationship, some claiming they had split, others hinting that Alexander had grown tired of his sudden fiancée. Isabella ignored them all, shutting herself in her room, refusing invitations, avoiding the world. Her parents asked questions she could not answer. She drifted through the mansion like a ghost, haunted by memories of his voice, his touch, the rare smiles that had seemed so genuine. She wanted to hate him, but her heart refused. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face stern yet vulnerable in fleeting moments, and the pain deepened. One evening she walked into the garden alone. The roses were in bloom, but their fragrance mocked her. She whispered into the night air, "Was it all pretend? Did you ever feel what I felt?" The wind carried no reply. She knew she should sever the arrangement formally, declare to the world that it was over, but something held her back. Perhaps it was hope, stubborn and irrational, that somewhere beneath the silence, Alexander was protecting her in ways she could not see. Yet hope was fragile, and her heart had been crushed under the weight of his refusal to trust her with the truth. As days turned to weeks, Isabella accepted what she had feared. The man she had begun to love had already slipped beyond her reach. What remained was only heartbreak, a wound she carried in silence, unseen beneath her practiced smiles whenever she stepped outside. The silence between Isabella and Alexander became more than distance. It became a void that swallowed her nights and gnawed at her resolve. She tried to bury herself in routine, pretending life had returned to normal, but every newspaper headline and every whispered conversation reminded her of the storm still circling. Victor Hale had not vanished after being humiliated at the altar. If anything, his pride had been sharpened into a blade. Rumors spread of his anger, of his desire to reclaim what he believed was stolen. Isabella felt his shadow everywhere in the lingering stares of men at parties and the unsigned letters that arrived at her doorstep, in the way her father stiffened whenever Victor's name surfaced. She told herself she was safe within her family's estate, but safety is fragile when pride and money are at stake. One evening, returning from a charity event she had forced herself to attend alone, Isabella noticed the car following hers through the narrow streets. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence, but when every turn she made was mirrored by the black sedan behind her, unease coiled in her chest. She urged the driver to speed up, but the car still trailed close until finally it veered away. That night she could not sleep. The echo of its headlights burned into her memory. Days later, the threat became undeniable. As she walked through a quiet corridor of her family home, two strangers appeared, rough voices demanding she sign a set of documents. She recognized Victor's name stamped across them. They wanted her to surrender the last of her family's holdings. Her breath caught fear slicing through her, but she refused. The men left with warnings that chilled her blood. "Tell Hale she will not bend," she whispered to herself afterward, though her hands trembled violently. She longed to confide in Alexander, to feel once more the reassurance of his presence, but pride and heartbreak silenced her. She had chosen to believe he was guilty, and that choice now isolated her from the one man who might have protected her. Still, danger does not wait for certainty. It struck one moonless night when Isabella left the newsroom where she had been helping a friend with research. The streets were nearly empty, her footsteps echoing as she hurried toward the waiting car. Suddenly, shadows detached themselves from the alley. Two men stepped forward, blocking her path. Their smiles were sharp, their eyes merciless. "Mr. Hale wants to remind you of your place," one sneered. She tried to step back, but another figure loomed behind her. A cloth pressed over her mouth, the acrid sting of chemicals filling her lungs. She struggled. Her cries muffled her heart pounding with terror. Darkness closed around her, and the last thought she clung to was not of her family or even of her freedom, but of Alexander. His steady voice, his piercing gaze, the warmth of his hand. Even in betrayal, she had longed for him, and in that final moment before consciousness slipped away, she whispered his name in silence. When Isabella awoke, she was bound to a chair in a dimly lit warehouse, the scent of oil and rust heavy in the air. Chains rattled in the distance, and the sound of dripping water echoed like a cruel clock. Victor Hale sat across from her, his suit immaculate, his expression carved in triumph. "You could have had everything, Isabella," he said softly. "Instead, you chose to humiliate me." She lifted her chin despite the terror coursing through her. "I chose my freedom." His eyes hardened. Freedom is an illusion. You will sign away your family's last assets, or you will learn what it means to cross me." He pushed a document across the table, a pen placed neatly beside it. Isabella stared at the paper, her vision blurring with fear. She thought of her father, her mother, her siblings. She thought of Alexander too, though she hated herself for it. Would he come? Could he? Victor leaned closer, his voice venomous. "No one is coming for you. Sign and this ends. Refuse and you will disappear." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. When she opened them again, there was defiance burning within. "Do what you must," she whispered, "but I will not be your pawn." Rage flickered across Victor's face, and his hand slammed onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the empty warehouse. Isabella's heart pounded, but her gaze did not waver. She was terrified, but somewhere deep inside, courage sparked. If this was the end, she would face it with dignity. Yet even as she braced herself, somewhere in the distance, engines roared, tires screeched, and the warehouse doors shuddered against the impact of an arrival that would change everything. The warehouse doors slammed open with a metallic crash that silenced every echo. Engines still rumbled outside, the screech of tires fading as a sleek car skidded to a halt. Victor's men stiffened, reaching for weapons, but before they could react, the shadows shifted, and Alexander Blackwell strode inside his presence, a storm in human form. He wore no expression of hesitation, only the steel calm of a man who had decided that nothing would stop him. His gray eyes burned like cold fire as they swept across the scene, landing on Isabella bound to the chair. For the first time since the night of her heartbreak, her heart surged, not with doubt but with desperate hope. Alexander spoke, his voice low, but carrying across the vast space. "Let her go." Victor rose slowly, his smile sharp and mocking. "Blackwell, the self-righteous savior. Do you know how pathetic you look chasing after a woman who will ruin you? She chose me once." Alexander's gaze did not shift. "She never chose you, Hale. You bought her family's silence. That is not choice, it is coercion." He took a step forward, his presence forcing Victor's men to falter, though their weapons still glinted. One wrong move, and Isabella felt the night could end in blood. Her breath came fast, fear clawing at her, but she could not tear her eyes away from Alexander. Victor sneered. "And what do you plan to do, Blackwell? Fight me here in front of witnesses who will vanish conveniently. The city will hear nothing but rumors, and you will lose everything." Alexander's jaw tightened. Better to lose everything than lose her. The words struck Isabella like a blow, her tears rising uncontrollably. She had begged for truth, for reassurance, and here it was, delivered not in whispered half-promises, but in a declaration of defiance. Victor barked an order, and his men lunged forward. Chaos erupted, shouts and gunshots exploding in the cavernous hall. Alexander moved like a predator, unleashed, disarming one man with brutal efficiency, his fist colliding with another before wrenching the weapon from his grip. The noise was deafening, the clash of steel and flesh echoing through the rafters. Isabella struggled against her bonds, her cries swallowed by the violence around her. For a terrifying moment, she thought Alexander would be overwhelmed, but then sirens wailed in the distance. Police lights cut through the night as reinforcements swarmed. Victor cursed furiously, retreating toward the back, but Alexander seized him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "This ends tonight," Alexander growled, his voice raw with fury. The police surged in, weapons drawn, forcing Victor's men to surrender. Officers cuffed them swiftly, their protests drowned by the bark of commands. Victor struggled, but Alexander shoved him forward into the waiting arms of law enforcement. Finally, the storm subsided, the air thick with smoke and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Isabella sat trembling, her wrists raw from the ropes. Alexander turned, his chest rising and falling heavily, his suit disheveled, a smear of blood across his knuckles. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands gentle as he cut the bindings away. Isabella collapsed forward into his arms, sobs tearing free. "You came," she whispered through her tears. "You came for me." He held her close, his voice rough and trembling despite his iron composure. "I will always come for you. I was a fool to let silence break us apart. I thought protecting you meant keeping secrets, but I see now it only hurt you." His hand cradled the back of her head, his forehead pressed to hers. "I do not care about empires or reputations. I care about you. I would rather lose it all than lose you." Her sobs quieted into shuddering breaths, her heart swelling with a fierce warmth that melted every shard of doubt. She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, her voice soft. "I thought you betrayed me. I thought I was nothing but a pawn." Alexander's eyes burned with regret. "I should have told you everything. The truth is that Victor tried to entangle my company with his schemes. He forged my name, spread rumors, used every weapon to bring me down. I stayed silent to gather proof, but I should have trusted you." His lips trembled with the words he had held back for too long. "Because I love you, Isabella." The confession shattered the walls around her heart. She had longed to hear it, feared she never would, and now in the midst of wreckage and ruin, it arrived like salvation. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered back, "I love you too, even when I tried not to, even when it hurt." They clung to each other as the police escorted Victor away in chains, as the flashing lights bathed the warehouse in harsh brilliance. To Isabella, the world shrank until it was only the two of them, their hands entwined, their hearts laid bare. Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Alexander drove her away from the chaos, his hand never leaving hers. In the quiet hum of the car, she leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion pulling at her, but peace finally settling. He glanced down at her, his expression unguarded, filled with tenderness. "Rest," he murmured. "You are safe now." She closed her eyes, the memory of his words echoing. Better to lose everything than lose her. For the first time since the day of her forced engagement, Isabella believed that freedom and love might truly belong to her. The man she once doubted had risked everything to prove his heart, and she knew with unshakable certainty that their story was only beginning. The morning after Victor Hale's arrest, the city awoke to a storm of headlines. News outlets splashed images of the disgraced magnate being led away in handcuffs, his empire collapsing in real time. Stock tickers scrolled with reports of Blackwell Industries stabilizing as truth emerged that Alexander had been framed. Journalists who once speculated about his guilt now scrambled to praise his resilience. In the middle of this maelstrom, Isabella sat quietly in Alexander's penthouse, gazing at the sweeping view of the skyline. Her heart was still raw from the ordeal, yet each glance at the man beside her filled her with new strength. He stood near the window shoulders, squared phone pressed to his ear, as he coordinated with lawyers and police. But when his eyes met hers, his voice softened, as if business and power ceased to matter in her presence. By evening, Alexander called a press conference. The largest hall of his headquarters filled with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Isabella hesitated at the entrance, her hands trembling, but Alexander reached for her and guided her inside. Together they walked to the podium, the room erupting in a frenzy of questions. Alexander raised a hand, and silence fell. His voice carried firm and clear. "I, Alexander Blackwell, have been accused of corruption and fraud. The true architect of those crimes has now been exposed. Victor Hale forged my signature manipulated accounts and sought to destroy not only my company, but my life." He paused, letting the murmurs settle before continuing. "Yet, amid this chaos, I discovered something more important than reputation or wealth. I discovered love." Isabella's breath caught as his gaze turned fully to her. Cameras' word pens scribbled, but all she saw was the intensity in his gray eyes. "She is not a pawn nor a shield. She is the woman I cannot imagine life without." Before the stunned crowd, Alexander lowered to one knee, a small velvet box appearing in his hand. Isabella's heart hammered wildly, tears threatening to fall, as he opened it to reveal a ring that shimmered under the lights. "No more pretending," he said, his voice breaking through the silence. "I object to anything that keeps us apart. Isabella Carter, will you marry me not for debt, not for duty, but for love alone?" The hall erupted in gasps, reporters leaning forward eagerly. Isabella pressed her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed. Every fear, Every doubt, every wound from the past weeks melted away beneath the weight of his words. She nodded through her tears, her voice trembling yet certain. "Yes, Alexander, yes." Applause thundered, cameras flashing relentlessly as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to gather her into his arms. The kiss they shared was no act, no performance for the crowd. It was a promise carved into the fabric of their souls. The press cheered, questions shouted, but neither of them heard. For that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Later that night, as they walked along the riverbank away from flashing lights and endless noise, Isabella leaned against him, still dazed by the whirlwind. She whispered, "You should have waited until we were alone." He chuckled softly, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I wanted the world to know that you are mine, not by contract, not by arrangement, but by choice." She smiled through fresh tears, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time since her life had been shattered by debts and duty, she felt whole, safe, cherished. Alexander stopped beneath a street lamp, his hand cupping her cheek. "I cannot promise you perfection, Isabella. I have learned that perfection is nothing but a cage. But I can promise you this: whatever storms come, I will stand with you." His words sank deep into her heart, sealing a vow that no ceremony could eclipse. She rose onto her toes, whispering, "And I promise never to doubt you again." Together they walked on their future, no longer a performance for society's gaze, but a journey they would face hand in hand. The city lights shimmered on the river's surface, reflecting the glow of hope reborn. For Isabella and Alexander, the game of pretense had ended, and in its place bloomed a love stronger than scandal, stronger than fear, strong enough to claim forever. Autumn sunlight poured gently over the Blackwell estate, turning the sprawling gardens into a canvas of gold and scarlet. Unlike the grand halls where Isabella once stood in despair today, there were no chandeliers glittering with cold light, no endless rows of strangers whispering behind crystal glasses. Instead, the garden had been transformed into a sanctuary of intimacy and warmth. Rows of white chairs lined the path, draped with satin ribbons that fluttered softly in the breeze. Roses bloomed in vibrant hues, their fragrance weaving through the air like a blessing. Only family and closest friends gathered their smiles, genuine their laughter unforced. Isabella stood behind the glass doors of the manor, her gown simple yet radiant, flowing like a river of white silk. Emily Blackwell, Alexander's younger sister, fussed with the bouquet in Isabella's trembling hands, her own eyes sparkling with mischief. "Relax," Emily whispered with a grin. "My brother looks like he is about to faint out there. He may be the coldest CEO on Wall Street, but today he is nothing more than a man desperately in love." Isabella laughed through the nervous flutter in her chest, grateful for Emily's warmth. She took a steadying breath as the music began, gentle notes rising from the string quartet waiting beneath the pergola. The doors opened, and light bathed her face. Every guest turned, but Isabella saw only one man. Alexander stood at the altar, dressed in a black suit cut with flawless precision, his gray eyes shimmering with unguarded emotion. When their gazes met, she felt the world melt away, leaving only the two of them bound together by everything they had endured. Step by step, she walked the path strewn with petals until she reached him. His hand extended steady and sure, and when her fingers slid into his, a calmness settled deep in her soul. The minister's voice carried over the gathering, gentle yet resonant. "We are here not to witness a contract, but to celebrate love freely chosen." Isabella's throat tightened as she looked into Alexander's eyes. She remembered the despair of her first wedding day, the thunder of his voice declaring, "I object," the nights of doubt and heartbreak, the danger and the rescue that followed. Every moment had led them here. Alexander spoke first, his voice clear though touched with emotion. "I once believed strength meant perfection and control, but you taught me that love is stronger than fear. I promise I will never let you face a battle alone, and I will believe you even if the whole world turns against us." Isabella's tears spilled freely as she answered her words, trembling yet fierce. "I once thought love was not meant for me, that I was destined only to sacrifice. But you showed me that even in pretense truth can bloom. I promise to stand by your side in light and in darkness, to laugh with you, to fight with you, and to never again let treacherous heels trip me without warning." Gentle laughter rippled through the guests, and even Alexander's lips curved into a smile. Emily sniffled loudly, dabbing her eyes, while the minister smiled warmly. "With these vows spoken, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alexander drew Isabella close, his hand cradling her cheek, as he kissed her softly, yet with all the certainty of forever. Applause rose, mingling with cheers and laughter. Emily clapped the loudest, her joy ringing above the rest. After the ceremony, there was no grand reception, no reporters clamoring for a headline. Instead, they gathered by the pond in the garden, fairy lights strung between trees, casting a golden glow. Friends shared stories, laughter spilled easily, and glasses of wine were raised not to fortune, but to love. Isabella sat beside Alexander, beneath a canopy of roses, her hand resting securely in his. She looked at him and whispered, "Funny, isn't it? We began with a whispered pretense, and now here we are, truly husband and wife." Alexander brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes soft. "No more pretending," he said, his voice steady. "This is forever." She leaned her head against his shoulder as fireworks bloomed in the sky, their reflections glowing in the pond below. For Isabella Carter, once a bride chained by duty, and Alexander Blackwell, once a man hidden behind steel walls. This was not the end, but the beginning. The storm had passed, and in its place stretched a horizon lit by love unshakable and eternal.